Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of How Adults Learn Affectively. Or holla! All right. So I am Leshe, or Luke Leshe, and I am here with my co-host,
Bryan Donsky.
and we are here. We are very excited. We are starting a podcast about adult learning. And so when we were going through this, just a little bit about the name. When we were looking at the name, How Adults Learn Affectively really stood out to me because of the word effective. And I don't know, I kind of wore Brian down on it, I think, on that. So,
I love it.
so the reason we're doing affective, so a lot of people don't know the difference between affective and effective. It's actually one thing I found when I was teaching. We'll learn a little bit about that in a little bit, talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So affective comes first. Something is going to affect, and then you will see the effect. And so effectively, according to Webster's, is arising from feeling of or emotion. And hopefully, as we see through our podcast, as we go through a lot of this with adult learning, we'll see that a lot of it does come from emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I feel like that also does a great thing for introducing us, because I love words and pedantic. So, I mean,
It works, right?
it does.
Yep.
And I just, that's who I am. I had the thing when I was talking to somebody earlier about this podcast. I was like, I really hope I don't nerd out and get too like geeky on it. And he said, yeah, you can't help who you are.
And that's what makes you special, right? That we can, be ourselves, we can be authentic. This is a topic that both of us enjoy. And I think you're really going to see both of our nerdy sides coming out, especially when it comes to thinking about adults, how adults learn, and thinking about words, and thinking about the overall big picture of how adults are successful. So I think you being nerdy, I think is actually a good thing.
I hope so. And I hope people enjoy it. Or at least stay on. I mean,
Hmm.
just get the information from it. So, a little bit about us, who we are. So, like I said, I'm Leshe. I have a master's of curriculum and instruction from the University of Arkansas. I taught high school for 10 years. I did biology and agriculture and environmental science, all kinds of stuff. And I made a move to real estate a couple of years ago. I think it was 21 or 22. And as I was getting my license, I actually found myself teaching classes on the real estate concepts and everything we had in our company that I'm in. And I've actually since then moved up. I no longer am a real estate agent. I actually am the director of technology for our region in the company. And I have 38 different offices that each have their own trainer. And I work with those trainers to train the information that I started training to our agents. And so in that, it's just had this passion and for education.
Awesome. That is awesome, Luke. And I did not know any of that about you. So this is brand new information. I can't believe that you were a teacher for 10 years. That is so cool. Interesting fact, I loved biology when I was in high school. It was one of my favorite classes. Now I don't really remember much about it, but I did like it back then.
You don't remember much about it, but you seem to be doing great at it. So,
Something like that, right? So a little bit about me, Bryan Donsky. I do not have as much background in education as Luke has, but I did spend, and I'm still there, I have spent 20 years in the retail banking industry. I got a bachelor's degree in human resource management from Immaculata University, which is a school outside of Philadelphia, PA. Originally, I'm from the Philadelphia area. I went to high school in Philly, and shortly after high school, I started my first job at a bank. And when I started, I was just your everyday MSR, what they call a sales and service representative. Anyway, one thing led to another, and I ended up in the training and development department about 10 years after I started in retail banking. And I've basically been doing that ever since. So 10 years in the branches, 10 years in training and development. Life brought me more into a coaching capacity So what I do today in my, everyday world, my full time job is I coach. I coach the bankers, the MSRs, the individuals that I sat in their chairs at one point. I know what they're going through. I know how difficult it can be to learn banking. So that's kind of what I do. I kind of just sit with them, make them a little bit more comfortable. And I really love what I do. I love the experience that I have in training and development. And it really helps me kind of be successful in my role today.
That's awesome. And I know, like, it's so awesome. I know we have conversations about this all the time, and we actually kind of connected because you were posting information about learning in the brain.
Mhm. I'm
Which,
I'm a big mental health advocate, and it all kind of goes hand in hand, right? The way the brain works, the way we learn, the way we process our emotions, the way that we utilize our life experiences to kind of shape who we are and how we learn from those experiences. And I think what we're going to be able to do with this podcast is tap into a lot of that to help our viewers understand their own learning journey and how they can kind of maximize their potential. And maybe, just learn something more creative or fun along the way.
yeah, and I mean, I've been talking to several people about this because I just get excited and just blabber on, and so like people I've talked to, I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's going to be your thing. Where it's really kind of for us to
Hmm.
polish up our knowledge of this, keep going on it, and also just connect with other like leadership and talent development people. But they're like, no, it's so hard to learn new things, especially at some of them were saying my age as I've gotten older,
Hmm.
which is funny because the one who said as I've gotten older was like 28, but they are an adult, their brain is formed, right? And so we can help, hopefully we can help those lifelong learners on these are things you can do to help you learn something new.
Hmm. Hmm. I
So
love it. Yeah. Using our own experience, we can definitely make a difference, hopefully, in the world of our listeners and our viewers.
it, well, I'll be awesome, and I'm so excited on it. So we've talked about kind of why we're doing the show,
Hmm.
what we want to do and what we're focusing towards. And we talked a little bit about our audience, but audience that we're looking for, and not that we're just looking for, but that can benefit from the show.
Hmm.
So we talked about those lifelong learners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leadership. I do a ton of leadership things. I actually have a big conference coming up on Tuesday with a leadership developer who I follow. So a lot of leadership is the leadership definition that I follow is that you train people how to think. And so, how are you a leader if you don't know how to train those people how to think? Because you're developing those people. And that is your job as a leader to develop them, to train them to think, to be a leader. And if you
Hmm.
don't know how people learn, how do you be a leader?
Because oftentimes people think part of training is just showing them how to do something and then having them repeat it, right? It's actually a little bit more than that. It's about going back to our traditional learning styles that we started with, kind of in grade school when that brain is kind of formulating. At that point, you develop into think about your experiences, think about your life events, and really get into the idea of the why behind everything. Right? If you understand the why, it generally helps you understand and grasp the concept a little bit more.
Right. And that's such an important part. And I know that'll be kind of our next one that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Our next episode, we'll talk about the needing to know the why, because we'll actually go through the steps of andragogy, which I'm excited for. And I'm trying very hard not to like break into right now. Um, and it is important to know that why of what you're doing. And this goes along with also like our talent developers, our instructional designers,
Hmm.
our facilitators, the people actually
Hmm.
out there doing the training, because a lot of us are given a set of curriculum. We're just given a here,
Hmm.
go train this. And sometimes it can be hard to say, oh, what do I do with this? How do I make it engaging? Why am I doing this? Because I've seen people given a set of curriculum that is, here's what you do, and the curriculum is sound. It's based off
Hmm.
of, the proper methodology, everything there, the proper principles. But the person giving it doesn't really understand that. So they just kind of, oh, I'm going to throw out the goals.
Hmm.
Like, I'm
Hmm.
not going to give them the why. I'm just going to, do this. I'm not going to follow here. I'm going to, oh, we're just going to demonstrate it. I've seen several different things in doing this. And so the people who are in front of the class, it's so important for
Hmm.
them to know. And I say class, I don't mean class, the person in front,
Right.
who is doing the training. Um, it's so important for them to know the why of doing things. So
Right.
we have the why of learning, but also the why we do it this way
Yep.
for people.
It's so much bigger than just button pushing, right? So when you are standing up in front of a classroom and you are showing adults how to maybe learn a new system, right? Or grasp a concept around a complex situation, right? Just explaining that situation or explaining the button pushing isn't really going to register with them unless they really understand the purpose of it. So, why are we doing this? Why do we do it this way? How is what we're doing today, or how is what we're typing here going to affect us in our career? How's it going to help us grow? Right. So, really focusing in on that why is really, really effective.
Oh yeah. And just going through there, it's yeah, you get questions and you obviously see the people in class or the
Hmm.
people you're working with. I do a lot of one-on-ones as well, and I'll have people, oh, I don't need that. And then we get farther down the section, and it's like, well, here's that thing that you didn't cover,
Right.
and so we've got to go back to this. It's like, are you okay with me going back and covering that now? Because I could have pushed through and been like, hey, you know, no, you're gonna need this later. But does that
Hmm.
resonate with people who have decided that they don't need it? And
Yeah,
so,
they've probably already shut down, right? Nope, I don't
oh,
need that. Somebody else is going to do that. It's not
yeah,
something that I'm going to need in my everyday job. So, yeah, forget about it. I'm not going to learn that.
right. Or this is not relevant to my question. It's like, yes, it
Hmm.
is. You just don't see that yet. So, and then our next one, curriculum developers. This is one thing that I love to do, develop curriculum.
Hmm.
I love planning lessons, having the things go through, trying them out and seeing
Yeah,
what is effective and not. And so this is a great one for our people here who are actually developing that curriculum, who usually
yeah,
know a lot about what is going on and what we're going to talk about, but sometimes we need a refresher. And
yeah.
sometimes we go off on tangents where it's like, oh, I need to look this one portion up again. And then if you're like me, you spend the next 2 hours reading, curriculum and Goji papers. So,
Right? I've been
but
there, done that, right?
I know that's one of the things we would chat on Facebook and just be like, "Oh my gosh, this article you were sharing about ADD, learning with ADHD." I'm just like, I got
Hmm. Hmm.
engrossed, and now I'm in the bottom in the the citations, looking at other stuff.
Yeah.
So,
You know, that's something I'm glad you mentioned, Luke, because ADHD is something that is so common in the workplace, and it's not something that we always recognize, right? So, in addition to how adults learn, I think, later on down the line, we should also maybe talk about how individuals with ADHD learn and how, curriculum developers, facilitators, instructional designers, whoever you may be, can maybe write their curriculum a little bit different. There's a lot of, especially millennials, who are diagnosed with ADHD later on in life. Personally, I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult when I was 38, and it really was a great diagnosis. It helped me identify a lot of the reasons why I did things throughout my whole life. And now that I understand it, and I've been developing tools to better grasp how I can work a little bit more effectively, it's really improved my life. So hopefully there's some time in here in our agenda throughout what we're going to do to really focus on some of that ADHD.
oh yeah, I would love to do that
Yeah.
because I was actually diagnosed dyslexic slash ADHD very early in life,
Really?
and yeah, and
Yeah.
my parents actually kept it from me
Hmm.
because my sister is also, and they told her that she was dyslexic and ADHD. And she was like, oh my gosh, does this mean that I'm a word we don't use anymore? And it's like, no, and so they were like, hey, well, Luke has been diagnosed this dyslexic ADHD. We're not going to tell him, that he is because what happened with my sister. And so
Yeah.
I went through school thinking I was stupid. Like, I was like, oh
Right.
my gosh, why is this so much harder for me than it is for other people? Why,
Right. Right.
what is going on here? And so I got to college and I went to, I actually went to the psychologist on campus, everything. And they were like, oh yeah, like, you're ADHD, dyslexic kind of thing. That's what this is. Cause like learning to drive, even the one direction arrows would flip on me. And so I
Really.
would have to look at other indicators for what's going.
Hmm.
And so then I talked to my parents. They're like, "Oh yeah, they diagnosed you that in like fifth grade." And I was like, "Oh, that's
Thanks for letting
great
me
to
know,
know."
Mom and Dad. Right.
Yeah, but it also I contributed a lot to my success with learners is because I had
Hmm.
to learn such different ways to connect to information that yes, it works with ADHD people, dyslexic people, those learning differentiated but it works with everybody. It works with such a
Yeah.
population.
Yeah.
And we're
Absolutely.
obviously a topic that we're both very passionate about and will come up a lot on here. I
Yeah.
think we do need to add
Definitely.
that to our list of shows. Um,
Definitely an ADHD topic, and maybe we'll touch a little bit on it every episode. Who knows? It's funny that you mentioned when you were learning to drive and how the signs were kind of backwards, right? Left was right, right was left. Growing up, I would play, infamous '90s video games, Super Mario Brothers. I was a kid of the '90s, and I loved playing Super Mario Brothers. The one thing that I always did was for some reason I held the controller upside down, right? I was the child who held it upside down. Left was right, right was left, and for some reason that made more sense to me. And I was successful with it. I beat the video games, and I did really well. So I think I probably have a touch of that dyslexia a little bit as well.
so it's common for those to go together.
Hmm.
It's kind of an umbrella that if you are dyslexic, it's likely that you are going to be ADD or ADHD.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
it's very interesting. And speaking of topics for shows, we going forward, so we're adding that one, the disability, of course, not disability, I'm sorry, learning difference is how I
Hmm.
like to
Yep.
say it because I don't have a disability. My stuff
Right.
actually
Absolutely.
usually comes out better than some other people's just because I think that end first. But
Hmm.
so a little bit on future plans. Why should people continue to listen to us after this episode? So we're thinking our next episodes are going to be we'll talk about andragogy
Hmm.
and but then there's specific steps to andragogy, and what we're going to do is we're going to break down some for our next little segment of shows. We'll actually take those steps of andragogy and we'll go through them and discuss them then. And so then after that, we could go into the 5 different gojis, the 5 different learning styles. We can go into education and just see. And we'd also love to hear what people in the field want to hear about, like
Hmm.
coming
Absolutely.
in, emailing us at how adults learn effectively at gmail.com. And that's all one word, no spaces. Effectively is AFFECT. Hold on, I have to look at it. I'm gonna get it. A F F E
AFFEC.
C T I V E L Y, as we have learned going through this and typing out many different ways.
We probably had to write it out a couple times before we really got it.
Yes, I kept trying to do
Hmm.
that, and then creating the design for the show. The computer was like driving me crazy because it would pop up different. It would spell it different ways
Hmm.
on there, and I was like, "Is this spelled correctly?" I had to go to people again. Dyslexia. I'm like, "Is this right? Is this good?" No, that's not how you spell that. Oh, okay. So,
Yep. Not so
um,
much.
yeah. And so we'd love to hear other things they want to talk about. So mainly our focus on this show is going to be andragogy.
Hmm.
Um, for those who don't know, and a lot of you will, I hope you're not rolling your eyes at us right now, andragogy is adult learning. So Andra, I have my lovely thing here because like I said, I'm a big old nerd. This is
I love
from
how excited you
Listening.
are for this.
I
This is
know.
awesome.
I have like combed through this. I keep this. It's on my shelf right next to me. It's a dictionary of word roots and combining forms. It actually has Greek, Latin, and other languages in there, and I'll tell you which one it's from by Donald Bohr. And so Andra it comes from the word man, which is a Greek root, which is that is the plural they used when you didn't know gender. It's not quite what we do now, but we're talking
Hmm.
Greek, not current
I
day
like it.
English. And then goji means to lead. And so it's leading adults, we'll say adults instead of man here, just for the gender neutral pronoun there.
Hmm. Hmm.
But leading adults, which again goes back to that definition of leadership,
Hmm.
which I love there. I went down a rabbit hole on how andragogy is actually from pedagogy, actually branched off from pedagogy, which is we now do to mean child learning, but initially started out as all learning.
Hmm.
So now we have andragogy and pedagogy. So we'll also have an episode coming up of what are the differences between adult learning and adolescent or child learning.
Hmm.
Um,
And
so
why do you think it's so important for us to understand that difference?
in those sections, way to slap me across the face with a question I wasn't prepared for, Brian. Um,
I'm sorry.
it it's all good. How do I say this without breaking down into like going into so many different things? To me, it's so important because you spend most of your life as an adult,
Hmm.
and we have to, and a lot of times as kids we don't understand why we're learning something, and so
Hmm.
we don't focus on it. There's a lot of similarities between the two, but if you're working with adults it's going to be different. And
Hmm.
it's so when you look at the zone of proximal development and the zone of learning, which again, things we'll talk about a little later, the zone of learning is there in between your comfort zone and your fear zone. And that is much smaller. It's like so much smaller for adults than it is for children, because we get comfortable in our ways and we just, I've always done it this way. Why should I
Hmm.
do something new? Why should I learn something new? And so it's finding that balance of let's get out of our comfort zone. But before we get to that zone of fear, which for some people, it's a razor thin edge,
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
you've done something different. And if we want our lives to be productive and those around us that we're here to help to be productive, we have to understand how to help them get there.
Hmm. And if
What
you
about
think
you?
about it, that's really where the most growth I'm sorry, where the most growth occurs, right? Growth occurs when we put ourselves into a situation that's normally we would find uncomfortable, and we grow from that uncomfortability, and it changes our brain in a certain way, and it helps us develop. It helps us develop those skills. It helps us develop those thoughts, those thought patterns, the things that will really make a difference in our lives, right? As we can continue to learn, as we continue to grow in maybe our new role or a role that we've been doing for years, that growth comes from that uncomfortability.
Very much so. And it's so interesting to see and how comfortable we get and how quickly we get comfortable with something,
Hmm.
that even if it is, hey, this doesn't work, we're still, oh well, this is the way I learned it. I like to use the math example. Everybody get
Hmm.
very upset about math curriculum changing, and it's like, oh well, we learned that this is causing issues later on. Or one of my favorites
Hmm.
is the difference between a hypothesis and a theory. And so we use it interchangeably, but then people don't understand that there is a difference between them. And it was actually causing issues when people were getting to college and science education, that when they got out, they were like, oh, well, this is a theory. It's like, no, actually, a theory is a well tested explanation. So this is already well tested, whereas a hypothesis is an explanation. And so because people weren't doing that, they were getting out there and they're like, oh, the building's gray because it's sad. That's a theory. It's like, no, it's
Hmm.
really not how,
Yeah, I'm sure
and
about
so,
that, right?
yeah. And so we were seeing people actually struggling once they got into that academia, the science, doing things like in biochemistry. I work with people who do that kind of work. And we were seeing them get out. I would go to them. I'd be like, hey, what are you seeing? What are some of these things that we're
Hmm.
seeing that are some of these misconceptions? Um, that are come about from it, and saying, hey, here it is. And it makes people so uncomfortable just to
Hmm.
say, here's the difference. And that is
Hmm.
not, and again, I think we see that people hit fear as soon as they're out of uncomfortable, and that'll express in anger. Have you ever had somebody
Hmm.
in a
Hmm.
training where they're like, blah, 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 blah. Well, you just push them into that fear zone where they're coming back at you to protect themselves.
Right?
Um, as our Michael Anderson says, you're getting into that fear ego of, oh no, I've got to protect myself because now I'm uncomfortable and I'm not allowed to be uncomfortable when I'm at this level.
Right. And that's where the learning occurs. The best learning is going to occur when you get to that breaking point.
Yes. And
That's when
so,
your brain is saying, I'm sorry to interrupt. That's where your brain
no,
is
no.
saying, oh my God, oh, what is happening? You're trying to make me do something different. I don't know what's going on. And then it's like, all right, I guess we're doing it differently. And then that learning happens. That learning function occurs.
And seeing that connection made in people just really, I love that,
Hmm.
because seeing that, oh, just that moment, it's not ever that dramatic, of course,
Right,
but
right, right.
just seeing that moment is so great in doing this. That I mean, I love, that's part of the moment I live for.
Yep, yeah.
So
That's definitely one of my favorite parts of our jobs as well. Our jobs as learning professionals, is just seeing those aha moments and finding ways to produce the aha moments, finding those connections that adults need, in order to learn the concept, order to grow, in order to develop themselves as a new professional in whatever organization that they're joining, whether it be a new organization or maybe they're learning something new in their current industry. Just seeing that moment of growth is really, really rewarding.
it is. And also knowing that these skills are applicable. This what my whole, when I was teaching, and even now, a lot of mine is focused on, I don't really care. I mean, I was kind of ridiculed as a teacher for this. I don't really care if you get the information that we're working on right now, but I care about you learning how to learn. Like, you knowing how you work is the most important aspect, because if you get out of this training and you didn't get that I'm teaching about ABC, but later on you know how you learn so you can grasp that subject, is almost more important. And I mean, I guess it worked. I had the second highest biology scores in the state. One
Good for
person beat
you. I
me.
love it.
That is all the kids. It was not me. I'm just saying, it
Right.
was all the students. One other teacher beat me, Linda Stoker, amazing person, and she came to me. She's like, "You won," because she taught pre-AP students, the upper students, whereas I taught
Yeah.
ESL, English Literature Second Language, and co-taught the little special needs students. And so that was the main focus. Learn, how do I learn so that I can apply this across the fields, not even just in the corporate world or what we're doing now, but going through in life. And again, I've found presenting that in a lesson like snaps people's brains because they haven't thought about it. And that can actually push us out of the comfort zone. Like, oh, like, do I
Hmm.
learn this way? Does this work for me? Even if you get them skeptical about it, they're now skeptical about how learning happens instead of skeptical about what you're training on. So,
We just got really deep there, right? We went from all different kinds of concepts to, how, at the end of the day, how do we actually learn? How does our brain function? I love it.
well, I mean, what are we going to have left for the other podcast? We're just, we're going to
We
spill.
might be out of it, right? I think it's interesting that we might want to even discuss maybe on a future episode. I know we have a lot of ideas, a lot of grand ideas, but I like that concept of, and I think you just mentioned it, Luke, but learning how you learn. I think that's something that we should probably discuss at some point, just to give the adults, the people, what they want to get out of this podcast.
Yes. And hopefully that will help as we go through. Like I said, the next podcast is going to be the steps of endogogy. I'm not actually going to say how many there are, because the way me and Brian have set this up is, we are giving each other the topics, and then Brian and I are both going out doing research on these and coming back with our opinions so we can have this discussion.
Mhm.
And so we came back, we had what was our definition of effective. I don't think I really
Mhm.
let Bryan talk on that one.
But you
And
know what? You're
then,
so good at it that I just appreciate you taking that lead.
thank you. I appreciate it. And when you come back in later and are mad at me on the podcast, I'm going to use that clip right there. Um, and then andragogy. And so what we've done is we've said, hey, our next is the steps of andragogy. So actually in my research, I found different number of steps. So I'm excited to hear what steps Bryan has found in our future podcasts. And I hope you as a listener are excited to come back and hear what are those steps of andragogy as we go through 2 or 3 of them, however many we get through in our next podcast in a little mini series coming up.
I love it. So what I'm hearing is that Luke just gave me my homework for the week, and that I am supposed to research some steps of andragogy. I got
Well, one, I don't like
it.
the word homework because I just find it fun and I don't like the connotation of homework. But also a little worried because we talked about it last week. So, but no, I'm just messing. And actually, looking up the steps of andragogy is what gave me the idea of the podcast, and why I reached out
Hmm.
to you because I was like, hey, there's so much out here. I want to push
Oh,
myself to
absolutely.
do this research and
Yeah,
learn.
absolutely.
We are at 30 minutes, and we're going to try to keep our podcast kind of 30 minutes, a quick, digestible time. I hope you enjoyed our first episode. I enjoyed recording it. So,
This was a fantastic experience. I also enjoyed the first episode, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to cover going forward, and how we're going to be able to make a difference in the lives of the listeners, right? So anybody who wants to listen really is welcome to, but really we're kind of focused on those curriculum development associates, the facilitators, the instructional designers, teachers, adult educators, whoever. So if you know any of those individuals, let them know about our podcast, so that we can reach as many people as possible.
and we can be reached at howadultslearnaffectively@gmail.com if you'd like to talk with us. Hopefully, in the future, we'll get a Facebook or Instagram or something set up like that. We're just not quite there yet. So, any comments, let us know. Great talking to you, Bryan. I'll see you next week.
Sounds good. Have a good day, Luke. Bye bye.